The Status of Andean Women in a Time of Flux by Peter Torres. Gender roles in the Incan Empire exist in stark contrast with that of colonial rule in the Viceroyalty of Peru and New Granada. Females in the era of self-rule with the Sapa Inca were subjected to the predominant form of economic and social planning based around a community. Some inheritance laws in the Incan Empire seem analogous to what we associate with contemporary Western Europe, with Andean women having land tied to them but then relinquished to the male during wedding proceedings. Likely due to less codification and regional differences, there is evidence Indian women in some 13th to 14th century communities could also pass that land to their daughter, like a father passes his land to his son, giving females some choice in the realm of property. The Inca Empire largely allowed this practice to continue, as long as the state and religious apparatus received tribute in goods and services, meaning many pre-Incan inheritance laws allowed women to delegate and work their own lands across the Andes. The Inca conquest did enact land disparity, with the ratio of women owning land to men decreasing, as military and bureaucratic functionaries, who were largely men, were given extensive parcels of land. Similar to an effect in the Roman Empire, where soldiers were given free land after 20 years of service in periphery lands like Britannia and Nabatea. In the realm of division of labor in Incan society, women fill multiple important niches in society, making men and women interdependent on one another rather than a woman having to solely rely on a man for survival like in Western Europe. Like in central Mexico, weaving was an important commodity done by women to both pay the Sapa Inca and provide clothing for the Incan household. Every woman of the upper class even of the upper class partook in this activity, implying that weaving had high prestige in society. Some types of weaving were recently decoded as having specific patterns, implying a coded language found within the weaving. Anthropologist Gertrude Solari even deciphers that some of the woven belts made by the women describe critical events in certain years or someone's status in a community, essentially making these weavers alternative historians as opposed to the likes of scribes in cultures with writing systems, which the Inca were not. This unsurprisingly was not included in the later codices, and Spanish chroniclers maybe due to much of female doings in Incan society being ignored by those men. Another important role for females in Incan society was the role of the brewer, making corn beer to be used for religious ceremonies, and she also controlled the surplus from a household's parcel of land. All of this is removed from a female's duty in the fields of the Incan Empire, where women grow and cultivate crops on the same level as a man. When compared to Western Europe, one can surmise that a woman in a pre-Columbian Andean region exerted more influence on the household and community when compared to their Western counterparts. The Spanish, when first arriving, had a positive opinion of the Incan division of labor, with Pizarro even complimenting and hoping to take over the Aclohuaysi, which was the female-dominated workhouses used to produce goods like cloth and beer for the Sapa Inca. The means by which the goods would be produced under the Spanish would strip the means of production from women, though. Other places visited by the Spanish were defiled, with Pizarro's men quickly taking advantage of the sacred Incan virgins, or the mamacones, even though they fully knew the consequences of such action. Many early chroniclers also glamorized the native noblewoman in their accounts, as in the early colonial period, many conquistadors and other Spanish colonists hoped to marry into the house of Incan nobility. This wasn't a true representation of culture convergence or empowering of the Incan woman, though, but instead a grab for land, social prestige, and general wealth by Spanish men who hoped to own their own encomienda run on native labor. As the 16th century continued, indigenous women continuously lost prestige in the Spanish colonies for a multitude of reasons. As previously stated, the high religious posts women held in Incan society were largely desecrated by looting Spanish soldiers or dismantled later by the Spanish Catholic hierarchy. Also, both Incan men and women's populations were decreasing, and in desperation began rebellions across the Viceroyalty of Peru around the 1580s. Don Toledo, viceroy at the time, started moving indigenous people out of the countryside and into urban centers, lowering overall Incan quality of life as a method to deter native agitation. Narratives by Spanish contemporary scholars in the New World, like that of Diego de Trujillo from the mid-16th century, veil any agency Andean women had previously, lambasting the more powerful women as harlots and evil, like their ancestors, according to their testimonies. The political climate by the late 16th century, filled with rebellion and Spanish fear, did more harm at the time, as many of the traces of Incan society, once partially maintained and used to ease Spanish conquest, fell apart and gave way to a society conforming more to Western models. hampering the Andean woman's ability to climb socially or politically.